And so we're going to begin in John 1. And as I said, we're just going to look at 5 questions as time allows us. And I didn't bring the other ones, so if I get done early, we'll get to go home early. So, yeah. My grandson got married a week ago, and he's my second oldest grandson. And of course, I did the funeral, the wedding. Yeah. The wedding, and he said, I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Papa, I want a sermon in the wedding." I said, "What do you want a sermon on?" He said, "I want a sermon on love." And I said, "Well, that's okay. I always put a little section in there about love." "No, Papa, you're not understanding me. I want a sermon about love." I said, "Yeah, I'll put one in about 15 minutes. Papa, you're not understanding me. I'm thinking 30 to 40 minutes, and I want an altar call." I said, "In your wedding?" "Yes." And so we did a 45-minute sermon and an altar call in the middle of their wedding. And what a great time it was. And I learned what he wanted by asking questions. And that's the way it is. The more questions we ask, sometimes it brings clarity. Sometimes it brings understanding. Sometimes we get to see where people are and what are they thinking and what are their thought process. And a few years ago I was asked to go to a 5th grade class in a secular school and teach disaster relief. And I don't know, I don't relate well with children. People think that's funny, but it's the truth. And I just don't teach children well. And so I was really panicked about going to this 5th grade class of about 10 or 15 students. And my daughter is the teacher of that class. And I was really nervous, and my wife said, "John, don't worry about it. Just ask a lot of questions. They'll be fine." And I thought, I can do that, But then as I'm driving up there, she calls me and says, "Hey, the 4th grade class decided they want to come in too, so it's going to be double." And then I panicked again. But I learned that questions really make a difference. And so as I was reading through this and these questions, we're not covering all the questions in there. There's some great questions. In the 1st chapter of John, we see John the Baptist was asked some questions. Who are you? Where'd you come from? Are you Elijah? And things like that. And we can look at those. But for the most part, we're going to look at the questions that Jesus asked. There's a couple later on in the sermon series that Pilate asked that are very relevant. But so if you look down to verse 38 in chapter 1 there, it says, "Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, 'What are you seeking?' And they said to him, 'Rabbi,'" which means teacher, "'where are you staying?'" So we see 2 questions in that verse asked. And the first one is the one we want to focus on. Jesus turned to them and said, "What are you seeking?" What a very important question. Now, who are these guys that are seeking? They were John the Baptist's disciples. They were there when Jesus was baptized. They were there when the dove ascended on him. They seen him. They were there when John said, "I'm unworthy to tie his shoes." They were there, and all of a sudden, they realized there's something special about this guy, and they were following him. But what a relevant question for all of us. If Jesus was standing here and he turned to you today and said, "What are you seeking?" how would you answer that? Some of you may be honest and say, "I'm seeking fame and fortune." Some of you may say, I'm seeking popularity. Some of you may say, "Well, I'm seeking a wife or a husband," or "I'm seeking acceptance." Maybe you might say, "I'm seeking peace. I'm seeking hope. I'm seeking," and all those things in the last half of that is what Jesus is about. Hope, peace, and joy. And really the question is, what is the deepest longing of our heart? What are we really going after and seeking in our lives? Are we seeking temporary satisfaction? Or are we searching for an eternal truth? Jesus invites us to seek him. It tells us in Jeremiah 29:13, you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. The sad thing in the church today is many times we as a church don't believe what Jesus has said. We suffer endlessly. We lose sleep and we worry and all these things because we don't take what he says. Or we try to find it ourselves. He says, when you seek me, you'll find me. When you seek me with all your heart. How many of the times do we try to find the answer to our stress and our anxiety and all those things by trying to find the answer ourselves? We know Jesus said he would do it. We know he said he'd be with us. We know he said he'd never leave us nor forsake us. But yet, we go out ourselves to solve our problems. And all it does is cause more anxiety, more stress in our life. So what an important question for each of us to ask ourselves today. When you came in those doors today, what were you seeking? When you leave today, what will you be seeking? The next thing we find, the next question that pops up is over in chapter 2. And you might find this question kind of interesting, but I think it's very relevant. Chapter 2 is where Jesus and the disciples were invited to a wedding. And they went to the wedding. You're going to know this story. You're going to know all of these. And his mother's there. And as they were there, they ran out of wine. Now, we need to understand the culture there and understand the idea there. You know, they didn't have Pepsi. They didn't have Diet Coke. They didn't have Coke Zero. They didn't have Fanta, as Tanner would have asked for. They didn't have sweet tea. They didn't have all of that kind of stuff and the options that we have today. And so I don't want you to think more into this, but their water, their wine, and here they are at this celebration, and they ran out. It's like running out of punch today at a wedding celebration, or out of sweet tea, or whatever it is that you're going to have. And it was a major thing at that moment, at that wedding, that they ran out. And in verse 4, in verse 3, Jesus' mother comes to him, wants him to do something about it. Verse 4, he says, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour's not yet come." What does this have to do with me? It reminds us that his divine timing and purpose is of utmost importance. It reminds us that that Jesus is an on-time God. He's not early, he's not late, but he's right on time. Now, I don't know about you, but I know about me. And sometimes his timing and my timing are not the same timing, right? It's kind of like when the preacher's up there and your stomach's growling and you're thinking, man, I hope he's about done because I need to go home and eat. I'm about to starve to death, but he's only on point 1 and point 5. And he's still going, and you're wanting it to get done. And sometimes that's the way it is with Jesus. We think, come on, and we get impatient. And we get to, just as we see throughout the scripture with many people, Abraham and many of the others, that when God doesn't act as fast as they think he should, or in the normal realm of things of life, because remember, God's still in the business of doing impossible things, we try to fix it, and we try to do it ourselves. And so we have to always pause and recognize the fact that his timing is everything. Are you impatient, demanding God work according to your schedule, or are you trusting in his plan? which means peace, calmness. You sit back, you wait, you let him do the work. Jesus' first miracle here foreshadowed his ultimate mission to bring joy and transformation. But it took obedience for it to happen. It's funny to me that Mary just kind of ignores that question that Jesus says to her. Woman, what's this have to do with me? It's not my time yet. And she just turns to the servants and say, do whatever he tells you to do. Let this happen. And he told them, grab the water jars, go to the well, get water. Now, I know me. I don't know about you, but I know me. I'd have said, go to the water well and get water. We're not getting them water. We're getting them wine. Why am I getting water? Explain this to me, God. Explain to me how this is going to happen. But they obeyed. They were people of faith. They were people, faith, as we know, is an action word. And what did they do? They went and did it. They went and got it. And because of their obedience and their action, somewhere in the process, that water that was useless, only used for cleaning up and that kind of stuff, and maybe they could have drank it. Some wells in Bible times you could, most you couldn't. Maybe it was drinkable water, maybe it wasn't. But God, what he did was he took something that was one thing and turned it into something so much better. Because of obedience. Because they didn't wait. They didn't hesitate. They did exactly what he said to do. If we could only grasp that, and how he could do that with us. And so much of the time we feel worthless. We feel no good. We feel alone. We feel like we don't fit in. We feel like we're an outsider. We feel like when we look at other Christians, we look at other things and we say, man, I'm never going to be that person. I'm never going to be that good. I'm just really no good. I sin, I've tripped, I whatever, and all those excuses. But I want you to know today, Jesus can still take water and turn it into wine. He can still take things that we look at and toss out as nothing and make the world impacted by it. Look, what happens is it went on, people noticed. They said, wait a minute, this is better than we've had before. They've been drinking this their whole lives, and all of a sudden, they knew when they got something, it was better than they had before. Now, some of you may be aware of this fact, and some of you may not. Some people think I'm a coffee snob, but I'm really not. And I do roast my own green coffee beans, and I had a friend come over the other day and purchase some beans, and he took them home, and it wasn't 15 minutes later, and he must have been going fast because he lived in New Hampton, and he called me, and he said, John, this is so much better than the stuff I buy at Walmart. I said, because that is fresh. And the stuff you buy at Walmart's been there a while. And that's what God does. He takes things that are old and stale, and he makes them alive and useful. Not that my coffee will make you alive and useful, but it's worth a drink, right? And so we see that in this text here, that because of obedience, because of listening to the word of Jesus, and because of responding to the word of Jesus, something came out so much better than ever before. John 10:10 says, and I quote this all the time, but we need to grasp it. It'll transform your life when you grasp this verse. The enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But I have come that you have life abundantly. Why are we not having life abundantly? Maybe because we're not listening. Maybe because we're not obeying. Maybe because we're not responding to what God's called us to do. He has said we can have an abundant life. Why don't we? Maybe we're not seeking the right things. Maybe we're not listening the right way. The next verse we find is in John 3. Now, you Bible scholars all know what chapter 3 of John is, right? You've probably already in your mind got John 3:16 running through your head. And I kind of hope you get John 3:17 running through your head as well. I wish we would have always put those two together. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. There is hope in Jesus, right? And so as we look through this in verse 10, and Jesus is having this conversation with Nicodemus, he asks this question. Are you the teacher of Israel, and yet you do not understand these things? He's talking to the church here. He's talking to a leader and a teacher in the church. And he says, yet you can't understand what I'm telling you. You can't understand that life is through God. Life is through Jesus. You're not comprehending this ye must be born again stuff. We got people in the church today that don't understand you must be born again. It doesn't mean you can live life your way. It doesn't mean we can do what we want to do. It means there's only one way, and that's God's way. And it means God's way is not your way. The Bible tells us that. It means that you have to give something up. It means it's going to cost you something. It cost Jesus something. This idea that salvation doesn't cost us anything, it costs us a lot. It costs us ourself. It costs us selfishness. It costs us selling out to the Lord and becoming his. We have too many fence jumpers. On 1 day a week or 2 days a week or whatever, they're going to serve God and be faithful, but the rest of the time they're going to live like the world, and they want to know why they're miserable. They want to know why they're struggling. They want to know why they're unhappy because they haven't sold out to God. One of the biggest idols you have in your home, we have in our home, we all do, is selfishness. And until we settle that, nothing else matters. And he says to Nicodemus, are you a teacher of Israel? You're a reader, you're a student of the word, but you don't understand. Until you sell out. Until you come to me and allow me to transform you and change you into something else. Why is it you can't understand that? Maybe we're not seeking the right thing. Maybe we're not obeying. Maybe we're not following his instructions and doing it his way. Maybe we're doing it our way. And then the fourth thing we find over in John 5. Many times when people ask me to share my testimony, I share this in the verses I give about my testimony. I can relate to this. This is where all the invalids are laying around the colonnades. And not that I ever was an invalid, but I was an invalid. I was dependent on a lot of things besides God, right? And in this, it says in verse 3, let's look at verse 3 for a second. In these laid a multitude of individuals, blind, lame, and paralyzed. This would have been a dirty, nasty, smelly place. Most of these people couldn't get there by themselves. Somebody else took them there and laid them there and put them there. Some of you are here the same reason today. Somebody brought you here and put you here against your will. But you still went. You still came. You know, maybe some of you here are drug babies. Your mama drugged you to church. Your daddy drugged you to church. You know, mine did. every Sunday. Drug me to church and made me sit on the front pew so that she could stand and sit in the choir and sing and point at me when I was doing something I wouldn't do. And you always knew when my mama gave you the finger, you were in trouble. You were going to get it when you got home. And Daddy wasn't in church, but Mama was, and Daddy was going to take care of it when you got home. And so I think about this, and I think today there's some of us that somebody's drug us somewhere or took us somewhere. Maybe our life has. As we've gone through life, it's taken us down roads where we're in places and situations that really are stinky. They're really nasty. When we look around, we see nothing but chaos and mess. And that was my life. And as we read this on, we see in verse 5, the man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. He'd been this way a long piece of time. There's some here today who have been this way a long piece of time. We've been trying to do it our way. We've been just going with emotions. We've been letting people push us here and there, trying to dictate our lives, and through it all, we are just miserable. And we're hoping for something to happen. These guys are laying there waiting for the water to move and the water to stir. And hopefully they can be the first one in there and get healed. Oh, they would love to get healed. Every one of them. The interesting thing to me is the one who could have healed them all was walking in the midst of them, and only one person noticed. The one who can heal us all is here today. The question is, are we going to take time to notice? Or are we going to focus on all these other things that are going on? And then, in the middle of that, in verse 6, when Jesus saw him laying there and knew he had already been there a long time, he said to him, do you want to get healed? I used to think that was the silliest question. Here's this guy. Somebody else takes him there. His meals are dependent upon somebody else. Everything he does is dependent upon somebody else. He can't do anything. He says, I can't get in the water because when the water gets stirred, somebody else gets there before me. I want to, but I just can't do it. I just can't find the way. And then Jesus asks this question, do you want to get healed? But it's not a silly question. Because there's a lot of people that don't want to get healed. There's a lot of people who want to stay in their misery. There's a lot of people that want to stay in their sin. Oh, they complain about it and they moan and groan about it, and they dislike the discipline and the consequences that come with it. They don't like the fact that they get caught. They don't like the fact that they go to jail. They don't like the fact that their lives are ruined. They don't like the fact that they got to pay a bunch of money. They don't like all the consequences that come with it. But they don't want to change because they keep doing it. Jesus says, do you want to get healed? It's very simple. Pick up your mat. Go. Now, I don't know about you. Sometimes I'm a reasonable guy. I'd have said, what'd you say? Pick up my mat? Do you not know how I got here? You realize that I couldn't even bring myself here? And the other side of that is when you think of that, do you want to get well? If he gets well, if he gets healed, all of a sudden he has to be responsible. He has to be responsible for his life. He has to get a job. He's got to work. He's got to take care of himself that he hadn't had to do for 38 years because somebody else did it for him. And so this is an important question. Do you want your life changed? Jesus said, pick up the mat. And he did. He didn't say, well, I've heard about this before, and I think it might work. He didn't say, are you sure this is what you want me to do? He didn't say, do you really know? He said, okay, and did it. Faith in action and belief. And he picked it up. But I want you to understand something. Just because he picked up his mat and walked didn't mean his life all of a sudden got easy. It didn't mean that he wasn't going to have any struggles in life. All of a sudden, he's got a lot of them. He's being accused by the Pharisees. They're questioning him. They're wanting to know what's going to happen and how all this took place. He's got to get a job. He's got to take care of himself. He's got to get cleaned up. He's got to put on new clothes. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to happen now. You know, when we surrender to Christ, it's not the end. It's the beginning. It's the beginning of a growing, live, loving, dynamic relationship. And it comes that way through us seeking Him and His way. What important questions these are. And we're going to stop at these 4 and pause with them and just think about those for a few moments. And ultimately, what about us this morning? How do you answer those questions today? How are you going to respond? Have you said so many times, well, I've heard this about Jesus before. You know, yeah, I know my life's a mess. Yeah, I know I need to be something different. Are you ready to surrender? Are you ready to obey? Are you ready to give in and do what He's called you to do? I'm going to ask you to bow your heads with me, and we're going to pray here quickly, and I'm going to ask the song leaders to come up and lead, and our prayer partners to come up, and we're going to pray. And if God's speaking to you in any way, and you want somebody to pray with you and to talk to you, I'll be up here. Come